Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing our opening hymn, number 1052, number 1052, in the only hymnal you should have today. Far beyond the grasp of hands, or light to meet the eye, as the reaches of the mind. There find the key to nature's harmony in an architecture so entwined. Like the birds whose patterns grace the sky and carry all who join in love expanding, the message of peace will rise in flight, taking the weight of the world upon its wings, in the oneness of everything. Peace is in the dance of trees who stood before the first breath of wind is yet perceived. Trust in the song becoming one with the dance, and no mysteries can be believed. Songs of love long past that touch our own are written in the earth, ever giving, and now to maintain the harmony gives to us all lives worth living, for the oneness of everything. Still we seek to find a proof that we might understand and reduce to terms defined. Vast and immeasurable time and space, also overwhelmingly designed. Oh, passing years just might I know the faith that winters in the heart to be reborn in spring, to hear and to feel the pulse of life enters my soul as a song to sing of the oneness of everything.
Good morning. I'm Helen Rivas from the Justice Committee. And I know many of you probably attended the rally at Railroad Park yesterday commemorating the 250th anniversary of the beginning of the American Revolution. And so 70 of us went up to Gadsden and we held a rally in front of the Etowah County Detention Center. People came from Mobile, Huntsville, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and Gadsden to be there, to let the people there know we think about them and we're supporting them, and also to ask that they shut down Etowah County again. You may remember that in 2022, ICE, which is an angelic organization, cut their contract because of the abuse, negligence, even death of prisoners at that place. One of the speakers yesterday was the sister of an American who has been unfairly charged with murder, and he is not getting any better treatment than the immigrant population there. And in Montgomery this past week, the House Judiciary Committee passed SB 53, which will criminalize people who live in mixed families. You can't take grandma to the doctors if one of you is not documented. They made an exception for charities, healthcare, religious organizations, and lawyers, which will just make it a little harder to sue, but you know we will be going to court immediately if this continues to pass. And even worse, HB 7, another Laken Riley Act, passed out of the House and is now going to a Senate committee. It isn't on the list yet. And it will allow law enforcement to enforce immigration law. We know how well that went the last time under HB 56. You know how much investment, money, and other costs Alabama suffered, not to mention human costs from that. So we are in a constitutional crisis, I think, and witnessing the blatant disregard at the top of courts and other things. I hope that the Supreme Court ruling yesterday that said no more deportations, the last judge that they were shopping in Bluebonnet, Texas, can no longer allow them to deport people. We will see how that goes. Since I'm really worried about the system of checks and balances, and the justification for all of this treatment around immigration is criminality, which we know is a lie. There are fewer immigrants in jail than any other demographic group. So please keep making your phone calls about this and the other issues you care about. We'll try to keep you informed. If you have any questions, contact the Justice Committee. And if you have any suggestions, that input is welcome too. And sneaking in an announcement because this is very important to all Unitarians, we need more volunteers to make coffee on Sunday mornings. Please consider helping out. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, sorry. We'll give a shout out to the Tatums who continue to show up and make coffee for us. So if you see them, please give them a hug and a thank you. If you want to join their team, they welcome volunteers, as Helen said. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to grab your connection card and fill it out. We encourage you to put these in the plate when it comes around during the offertory. If you don't have time to fill it out before the plate gets to you, you can always drop it off with the ushers at the back entrance. Our church is supported by those who call this church home and by those who support the efforts of our church to change our world for the better. If you are a first-timer with us today, please just pass the plate when it comes around to you. You are our guest, and we're just glad that you're here with us. We share our cash plate every Sunday with organizations whose work reflects UU values to care for the world around us. This month, our Share the Plate recipient is the Friends of Shades Creek, and you can learn more about them in your order of service. In the bottom right corner, there's a little blurb about what they do. Thank you for your support of our church and our Share the Plate recipient. May we give in love and in hope. Thank you for sharing your joys and sorrows. We continue to lift up Xander Lee and Katrina Mertz as Katrina goes through some really difficult health troubles. And as Helen alluded to earlier, we continue to lift up the families who are being ripped apart by unjust deportation. And we wish for due process for all of those who are being denied justice. Please join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation, followed by a brief moment of silence. For all those who celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, may this day be another affirmation of divine love and promise. For those who see the eternal story of new spring and life beginning anew, may you breathe deeply this season of promise and hope. For all those who are experiencing despair or hopelessness this Easter, may you find in that darkness or that depression a doorway to light and warmth that offers you freedom. For all of us, together we can do what no isolated person can do alone. Rolling the heavy stone aside reminds us that we are far more powerful together than we could ever be on our own. Our offering of strong hands to help, our prayers made real. Let us begin again in love. A brief moment of silence. Amen and blessed be. Now we'll invite the children forward.
Good morning, friends. I feel like there's some reason we have so many more friends today than we have had other Sundays. Someone has been brought to church with the promise of candy. Totally fine. Oh, but I forgot to get any candy. Oh, no. Kidding. There's candy. Don't worry. Man, we're about to have a riot, y'all. So I'm going to share a story today that I have probably told a version of in the past. But it seems really apropos with everything going on in the world right now, so I thought we'd talk about it again. Does anyone know who Mary Magdalene is? Some grown-ups out there know who Mary Magdalene is? Well, let me tell you who she is. She lived a really long time ago, and she was known for her wisdom and her strength and her deep loyalty to her teacher. She really loved her teacher. She wasn't a queen or a noblewoman or a warrior, but she had something even better. She had courage. Mary had been a follower of her teacher for a while, and his name was Jesus. And he was a man who spoke of peace in a time of violence, love in a time of fear. She had walked beside him as he taught people to treat one another with kindness, to lift up the poor, and to believe in the strength of compassion. But then Jesus died, kind of unjustly, some people would say. He died on the cross. But Mary didn't fade away into history. She did the opposite. She set off on a journey determined to keep telling the story of his life and what that story meant to the world. According to one ancient story, her travels eventually took her all the way to Rome. And that was the heart of the vast empire, and this was the empire that had ordered her teacher's death. But she didn't go just to Rome. She went straight to the emperor. His name was Tiberius Caesar, and he was the most powerful man in the world at the time. So here is this woman who wasn't a noblewoman, she wasn't a queen, she didn't have any special powers, but she went right up to the emperor. And she greeted him, and then she told him the story of Jesus' life and the messages he taught. She spoke of kindness and forgiveness, and how even after great loss, people could find hope again. But she ended the story with a bold statement that something miraculous had happened, something that no one had expected, that Jesus had returned from the dead. And the emperor was like, no. People don't return from the dead. That's impossible, just as impossible as an egg turning bright red. And then, according to the old legend, it did. Right there in Mary's hand, the egg, the plain white egg, turned bright red. No one exactly knows what happened. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was meant to show the world that it still holds some wonders that we don't understand. Or maybe Mary had a clever way of making a point so powerful, even the emperor could not ignore it. Whatever the truth was behind the egg, the story lived on. And for generations since, especially around springtime, people have shared red eggs. The red egg became a symbol not just of life or hope, but of the power of standing up, speaking out, and believing in something bigger than yourself. Because after all, sometimes the most powerful things in the world aren't armies or crowns or presidents. They're the stories that we carry and the courage we have to tell them. So I have a red egg for each of you today so that you can keep it with you to help you remember to believe in yourself and your power to speak up, just like Mary. And if there's any leftover grown-ups, I'll leave them out in the narthex and you can take one too. So that's our story for today. We're gonna head that way. Grown-ups, could you do us a favor and sing us downstairs?
Our guest speaker today is someone that many of you know well, Freeman Presson, a member of our church. Freeman is the only MIT graduate you may ever meet who is also a professional astrologer. Along with 45 years of working in IT, he also practices Zen, pagan, magic, Hermeticism, including healing, tarot, and astrology. He will also take any excuse to cast the I Ching. I hope you will all give Freeman a round of applause as he comes to the stage.
Good morning. No, I didn't mess it up that badly. I just kept them in my pocket. Well, pleased to see all of you this morning. So being as long disconnected, does it sound okay? Okay. Being as long disconnected as I have been from following the Christian liturgical calendar, when the sign-up came out to pick a date to fill in and give a sermon, I chose this date entirely on the premise that this was the day by which I could reasonably expect to have my talk ready. And a week or two later, after I'd started working on it, I saw, of all things, a meme on Facebook. And this meme was along the lines of, "Oh, wow, man, did you see that Easter's on 4/20 this year?" And interestingly enough, that actually gave me a key idea about how to title and structure the message today. I have resisted any urge to make cannabis references, however. So my talk today is about Hermeticism, and there's also a motif of dying and reviving knowledge, suitable for Easter. Because the tradition came forth and then receded, came forth and then receded, and never really died. Unlike some I could name. It never really died, but it had multiple near-death experiences. So the tale is set in Egypt, Athens, and Florence, and it branches into Haran, Baghdad, Spain, London, Hillbilly, Georgia, Amsterdam, and elsewhere. We won't be visiting all those places. As usual, I'm actually going to start somewhere else. Aristotle began the book that we now know as the Metaphysics, which, by the way, it's possible that Aristotle's Metaphysics got its title from the fact that it was traditionally shelved after the physics. That may be all metaphysics originally meant. But he said, all humans by nature desire to know. Now, there are two major branches of knowing. There's the intellectual knowing that's more common every day. I know certain things from experience or from science or whatever. That's ordinary, everyday knowing. The common term, which you will hear again in this talk, for spiritual, intuitive knowing is gnosis. G-N-O-S-I-S, gnosis. Now, philosophy before Aristotle was much more about gnosis than it was about intellectual knowing. The pre-Socratics, through Plato. Plato was definitely a Gnostic kind of guy. He was a high-level initiate. Aristotle, not so much. Aristotle was much more the here and now. You may have seen the famous painting of the two of them walking through an idealized portico of the academy, and they're deep in discussion. And Plato is going, the heavens, the world of forms. And Aristotle is going, the earth where we're walking, right there in front of us. Very evocative. One common phenomenon back then was romanticizing Egypt. Oh my God, they loved their Egypt as the fount of ancient wisdom. This tendency was so common that scholars have a technical term for it. They call it orientalizing. The biography of every famous wise man in the Greek world, Pythagoras, Empedocles, and so on, right up through Plato. Now, if I say biography, and I'm talking about biography in the ancient world, the most you can say is there may be a little truth to it. I think there is in the case of Plato. I can see the influence. But those biographies involve travel and to an education in the temples of Egypt. Interestingly enough, this tendency came about strongly again in Renaissance esoterica. Everybody was just fascinated with Egypt, mostly because they didn't understand it. A really good example is the attribution, which we still hear today. of the mysterious archetypes of the tarot to Egypt. Hint. There is a slight influence from one book, but it's really just, the similarity is because it was in the air. Not that the tarot did not come from Egypt. In fact, by this time, ancient Egypt had become a cult even to the Egyptians. The last hieroglyphic inscription is actually dated. It comes from August 24th, 394 of the Common Era. And it wasn't long after that that the ability to write and then the ability to read hieroglyphs was lost, even in Egypt. And they weren't deciphered again until the 1850s. And in my humble opinion, they weren't deciphered well again until recently, but that's another, anyway. So this vague orientalizing tendency of the classic period gave rise to one definitive offspring, and that is the Hermetic tradition. Okay, so how long did it take me to actually get to my topic? All right. After Alexander the Great won Egypt by defeating the Persians in the 4th century BCE, the Macedonian Greek Ptolemaic dynasty immediately began accumulating and curating the wisdom of Egypt. The early Ptolemies seemed to be driven by a real thirst for knowledge. In fact, it seems to be the primary reason why, after Alexander's death, his generals all fought over which parts of the empire they would get, or which of them would put the empire back together. Because on his deathbed, Alexander, who had asked who should his successor be, and he laughed his last laugh and said, the strongest. So that didn't help them much. But Ptolemy was basically, I'm going home to Egypt. I'm keeping Egypt. If you guys want to fight over the rest of it, I don't care. You come to Egypt, we have a problem. All right. At least his fascination seemed to have been the wisdom and the history of Egypt, and seems to have been a pretty legitimate interest. We can question what happened after that. And there was always a political performative current in this whole tendency to collect and curate everything Egyptian. The Library of Alexandria, for instance, well, it was a good library, and it was also an imperial showcase, just like the British Museum is. I mean, the British Museum's a great museum too, but mainly it's a look how great the British Empire is. Okay, regardless, there were true seekers among the Greeks, and there were certainly competent teachers among the underemployed Egyptian priesthood. Actually, their working conditions were pretty good. They never worked full year, even before the Persians and then the Greeks took over. And certainly afterwards, some of them had to go out and be wandering teachers and magicians for hire and whatnot. But they had plenty of Greeks who were very eager to hear what they said. And fortunately for us, a great deal of the teaching was recorded in Greek, so it didn't entirely go away. Actually, it was lost to the West for a time because the West stopped reading Greek. You got to hold our hands and translate it into Latin, okay? And then it was recovered like an Easter egg by someone working for Cosimo de' Medici in 15th century Florence. Cosimo was dying. He had lived a long life as the first citizen of Florence, which, first citizen means dictator. And he had accomplished He had actually accomplished a lot as a patron of the arts and philosophy and so on. And he had actually established a Platonic academy, the second Platonic academy in Florence. He gave the scholar Marsilio Ficino a villa outside the city. It's actually rather beautiful. I've got it as a background on one of my computers. And it's rustic, I suppose, but it's rather nice. Now, at the time, he had Ficino working on translating the complete works of Plato from Greek to Latin. But what he knew by reputation and really wanted to read before he died was the Corpus Hermeticum. So he notified all of his book seekers. Basically, he had a small army of Dean Corso types, if anyone's seen The Ninth Gate, that the Hermetica was their top priority. And it was brought in. He sent it right over to Ficino with a message to drop Plato, forget Plato, translate this. So Cosimo did, in fact, get to read the Hermetica or have it read to him before he died. Now, it's entirely possible that I've talked enough about the origin and transmission of Hermeticism without some summary of its content and some vocabulary. Hermeticism starts with, unsurprisingly, a creation story. In the Hermetic creation story, everything was brought about by the agency of the One, the monad, the God of the philosophers. Depending on time and place in Egypt, had been referred to as either Atum or Amun. But you know, if there's only one, it doesn't need a name. And the mechanism was out of the divine mind, known as nous in Greek. The One combined it with the Logos. That's a word you've heard before. And you've probably heard it mistranslated as word. Oh, Logos just means word, right? Like in the Gospel of John. Oh, no, please. Logos is one of those words that has a whole rich backstory to it. And it actually was hardly ever used just to refer to word. There was another Greek word for word. Logos is reason or the system behind something or the laws of something. So when the One injected the Logos into the mind and out into the darkness, it seems like even in Hermeticism there seems to have been a pre-existing void or darkness or whatever. None of the ancient systems seem to have gone, well, we're talking about a God here, so it could have just created everything from nothing, right? Now, that didn't come around until medieval times. So you could say that is giving the world its laws. So in this case, the Logos was probably, we're going to say primarily mathematical. In fact, if you're just talking about, okay, what had to be put into the world to make it turn into a world, that was probably all math. If we go to try to describe it, then we get into a lot of words. One thing I like about this is it can actually be fitted. It could actually be fitted into modern cosmology. The initial combination of Logos with nous, we can say that resulted in what we poetically sometimes call the cosmic egg, which was this thing that had the potential to expand into a cosmos, and eventually did, or otherwise we wouldn't be here. But back into the Hermetica itself, this combination culminated in the emanation of, depending on who you listen to, 7 or 9 levels of reality, increasingly dense until we get down to the physical world. And each level is populated by daimones, just the Greek word for spirits. And because they're all emanated from the one, they exist in a hierarchy, including humans. And everything in this network is related to other things by sympathia, which is just correspondences, which allows communications up and down the network. So you'll sometimes hear the Hermetic axiom of as above, so below. Now, the ultimate goal of the system is reunion with the one, which the Greek word for that is henosis. Also, operative Hermeticism has 3 branches. Theurgy, which is God working, ritual magic aimed at working with the governors of the planetary or stellar spheres. The medieval and Renaissance Catholic Church didn't have a big problem with Hermeticism, at least the way it was presented to them by the Italians, because it seemed to them to be proto-monotheism. And the fact that it recognized various powers under the one was not a whole lot different from Catholic doctrine, in which we have choirs of angels. So then alchemy, of course, is about transforming materials while also refining the operator. Out of the 3 branches, I know least about that, and I have plenty of reasons for not pursuing it. Later, it was also used to make plant medicines, and then astrology works with theurgy, works with everything to determine the best times for all operations. The primary use of astrology within the system. You know, much of this sounds familiar to anyone who studied Plato, because Plato was originally inspired by Egypt, and because this final transmission was recast in Greek using the language of Middle Platonism, a bunch of which I just rattled off, and only about 2 of those Greek words I'll even mention again, sorry. Hermes Trismegistus is credited as the author of the system. He's a fusion of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. Thoth was already ritually addressed as thrice greatest, or sometimes 5 times greatest, or 8 times greatest, or whatever. And the Greeks were always running around looking for at other people's gods, going, oh, that one's most like Zeus, and that one's most like Hermes, and so on. In this case, they were right, though. The Egyptian Thoth had an awful lot in common with Hermes. Now, we don't have much of the magical workings. What we call the Corpus Hermeticum is 17 short tractates that are dialogues where generally Hermes Trismegistus, addresses either Tot, which is an obvious reduction of Thoth, or Asclepios. Asclepios, of course, is a Greek god of healing and other things, or demigod, I guess you could call him, and he was syncretized with the great architect of Egypt, Imhotep. So you see, the Greeks put Hermes first and put Tot as his son. Really kind of backwards, but okay, we'll go with it. Some of the a bunch of the theurgical material is actually preserved in a book by the Neoplatonist Iamblichus called The Mysteries of the Egyptians. And then there are a few other texts, Greek magical papyri and so on. And they're all, as you might expect, pretty difficult to read and make anything out of, but scholars and mages are both working on it. Okay, the Hermetic message never goes entirely away, even when it goes underground or is drowned out by other voices. Its fate was tied to the major conflict after the Renaissance, as Rome fought, sometimes literally, to keep control against the rising tide of the Enlightenment. And during this time, it was manifest in what we call the Rosicrucian movement, which was an example of an intellectual and spiritual movement that may have been a hoax from the beginning, and was certainly never the organized movement that the Rosicrucian manifestos imply. Later, it was stated that the founders of the Royal Society of London were invisible college members, that is, graduates of the Rosicrucians. Well, I can't vouch for this. I really don't think I should vouch for this, but Sir Isaac Newton was a lifelong enthusiast. He spent half his time on alchemy, astrology, and theology, and only the other little completely remaking modern science. The residual enthusiasm for Rosicrucianism, little of the residual enthusiasm for Rosicrucianism survived the disaster of the 30 Years' War. Actually, not much survived that. And during the Enlightenment phase, theurgy was mostly covered over by Christian mysticism. Of course, in all of this time, Hermeticism had to be somewhat compromised to not attract the attention of inquisitors. Alchemy died of its pretensions, not to mention its obscurity and secrecy, even as it gave rise to chemistry. While astrology carried on as part of popular culture, medicine, and private magical practice until at least the late 18th century. It never completely went away, but became less important, at which time it's fair to say that the entire tradition had gone fallow. And this was the period of the peak of the Enlightenment. European intellectuals became enamored of empirical science because it showed practical results. Philosophy, once the root of all fields of knowledge, allowed itself to be demoted and to have the standards of empirical proof from science applied to it. So, don't get me wrong about the Enlightenment. We needed the Enlightenment very badly, and we're all children of the Enlightenment intellectually. Excuse me. But we overdid it. The Romantic and Gothic movements preserved a vital interest in personal spiritual development outside of established churches and in a sort of imaginative paganism that still drives new religious movements to this day. Interestingly enough, this was a period where instead of the classical, or let's say in the beginning of this movement, it was all, all of the classical Greek gods were showing up in people's gardens and whatnot. And toward the end, they became fascinated with Pan. Ooh, Pan, the god of wild nature, whose name means what? His name means all. There's another Hermetic slogan, Hin to Pan, the one is all, the one is in all, and all is in the one. Then the next phase, a full-blown occult revival in the late 19th century, is fascinating, but I'm being pulled back to fill in some of the details from the Hellenistic period in Egypt. There's evidence in the texts themselves that the Egyptian priests were ambivalent about sharing their tradition with their Greek rulers. One important reason is that they felt the revelation was tied to the land itself. In fact, in the dialogue known as Asclepios is the following: Do you not know, Asclepios, that Egypt is an image of heaven, or to speak more exactly, that all of the powers that rule and work in heaven have been transferred to earth below? Let's examine this. There's a clue in the celestial alignments of the great monuments, and another in the rituals of ensoulment of statues and talismans, which is still a central part of occult praxis today. So you ever see the ritual of the opening of the mouth? That applied to mummies, statues, and other things. So basically, we were being told that Egypt was what we now call a hyper-talisman of all the heavenly powers. Another reason was doubt and reluctance about expressing the tradition outside of the hieroglyphic scribal tradition, which itself was a sort of talismanic magic. We have a short, very hard to read text about the training and initiation of Egyptian scribes in the temples. And it's really profound. It's the kind of thing that you would expect, it's the kind of thing that you would expect high-level priests to be getting. They were basically, they weren't just people who could write, they were priests of writing. And one of the most interesting things I got out of that text was the way they regarded the hieroglyphs themselves. The hieroglyphs were not just pictures and not just letters, but each one was they were ensouled, they were full of power, each in itself. And they were expected to use them respecting that power. It'd be really interesting to learn hieroglyphs really well and go back and see how they did that. I probably don't have time. Somebody want to pick it up for me? Okay. All right. Fortunately, not all the Hermetic teachers were quite so reluctant. The writings and art in the tomb of Petosiris, who lived in the late 4th century BCE, they include all of the usual Egyptian funerary material, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, but also text and carvings in Greek and art in a Greek style, which was unheard of in anybody else's tomb, that seemed to welcome the Hellenic airs of the tradition. This is partly because he was active through the Persian occupation. And then when the Greeks took over, he seems to have said, okay, they're certainly not Egyptians, but they're so much better than the Persians. Let's see what we can do. And he was able to get himself into favor with the Greek dynasty, get his temples restored, and he seemed to be the works and plays well with Greeks Hermetic mage. Now he was already known as an expert astrologer, and now we see him as a preserver of the tradition after the upsets of Persian rule. Throughout its history, the Hermetic current evolved and absorbed other influences to an extent that probably would have horrified Petosiris. In the Renaissance, it needed to form and present itself in ways that would not attract unwanted attention from inquisitors, as I said. Ficino's successor, Pico de Mirandola, grafted a Christianized version of Kabbalah into it, and he had multiple successors who elaborated on it. Okay, Kabbalah is interesting. Not Hermetic by my definition, and especially not when the reason that you're adopting it is to help you convert Jews to Christianity. Come on now. I mean, they had specific stuff in there. I'm not just speculating. Coming to the early 17th century, Paracelsus studied Hermeticism and used its principles to develop the first synthetic medicines, many of which were wildly successful. Paracelsus was responsible for a complete revolution in medicine, and a couple of other fields too. Guy was a major genius. For years after, alchemy and astrology, not to mention the esoteric four elements underlying the temperaments and humors, were integral to medicine. How about that? You go to medical school, first course you take is astrology. Okay. Around this time, the tarot, which previously had just been for playing games, albeit games with a lot of hermetic symbolism built in, was developed as a means of divination, and various ways of linking it with astrology and Kabbalah were advanced. This probably repulsed any rabbis who saw it, but they were not in the target audience. Also throughout this period, Freemasonry had absorbed a lot of hermetic lore and symbolism, and Masons also revived the study of the Rosicrucian texts. I don't have time to talk about the Rosicrucian texts. Look them up, they're very interesting, especially the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. There's a band named after it. Chemical Wedding, My Chemical Wedding, yeah. Certain esoterically inclined Freemasons, especially in England, started up Hermetic and Rosicrucian orders as a way of extending the Masonic curriculum. The most famous of these was the late 19th century Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. These orders admitted women and had a very sophisticated system of degrees. I actually belong to what amounts to one of the successors of the Golden Dawn, although I'm not active in it. The head of my order has said the Golden Dawn system worked in spite of itself. Okay. The flourishing period of the Golden Dawn itself ended in about the 1920s. The order was Hermetic only in that it derived some of its basis from the old Hermetic texts, I guess, and because it taught astrology, theurgy, and inner alchemy. They didn't do any laboratory alchemy. And its central goal was, if not Henosis exactly, it was the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, which could lead to it. It was a major influence on Gerald Gardner, and when he developed the ritual structure of Wicca in the late 1940s. And pardon me if you've heard a different story before, but that's how it went. And this carried over into many of the other groups that formed the Neo-Pagan Revival, which gained great momentum in the 1960s. And if I were going to throw in the cannabis reference, it would be there, and continue to the present. On everything from the Golden Dawn to neo-paganism, books have been written. I read half of them. Here I'm mainly concerned with the manifestations that carried forward some part of the Hermetic impulse. Okay, so the Hermetic tradition was like a tide, flowing in late antiquity, the Renaissance, the late 19th century, and the present, and ebbing in between. It influenced philosophy, theology, science, and esoterica. Shakespeare's worldview is essentially Hermetic. There's actually a nice little book about the Elizabethan worldview written by, okay, the title is The Elizabethan Worldview. You should be able to look it up. I do not remember the author's name, although he certainly sounded like an English academic. And it did a really nice job of relating the Elizabethan worldview back to Hermeticism, primarily through the works of Shakespeare. It's quite convincing if you ever want to pick it up and read it. And you will understand Shakespeare a lot better if you do. I was being given it as the first reading in my astrological magic class with Christopher Warnock, but he didn't much care if I understood Shakespeare or not, but he wanted me to know at least that much about how pervasive the Hermetic worldview had been. John Dee, he was a court advisor to Elizabeth I, and a renowned mathematician, contributor to navigational methods and more exact cartography and a lot of scientific stuff, was also steeped in the Hermetic tradition. And then Giordano Bruno, Who's heard of Giordano Bruno? Only a few. Okay. Everybody should read one book about Giordano Bruno. He was an amazing guy. Well, Giordano Bruno was firmly in the Hermetic tradition, and he died for it. I guess I'll throw in just a little bit here. He was an early adopter of the Copernican view, and not only did he believe that the earth revolved around the sun, that wasn't what he was burned at the stake for. He was burned at the stake because he maintained that the sun was a god. And Isaac Newton lived for it. Hermeticism always promoted independent thought. It taught universalism, almost by definition. It taught universalism. There is no hell or eternal punishment in the Hermetic tradition, and almost by definition, Unitarianism, and emphasized the interconnectedness of all things. So it nowhere contradicts and everywhere supports our values. So that's why it's a healthy and affirming tradition for all UUs to understand. Thank you.
Please rise and body your spirit to join in our closing hymn, number 1031 in your teal hymnal, number 1031. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
You may be seated. We'll close out with just a few announcements. As Courtney said, our Easter egg hunt is today following the service. There is no scheduled RE time for children and youth because at 11:30 we invite all of our families to come out and participate in the Easter hunt, the egg hunt. We also ask that parents are present to supervise their children during the egg hunt. Thank you very much. Regarding the stewardship drive, we are still missing a ton of pledge forms, and the board is dealing with a deficit. So on behalf of the board, we'd ask that if you haven't submitted your pledge form, please do that as soon as possible. There are physical copies in the narthex today, and if you go to uucbham.org, there's a button right on the homepage where you can make your pledge. As a reminder, your pledge is how we can budget for our staff salaries, our utilities, and our coffee. So your prompt attention to this pledge form is very important. The Environmental Justice Task Force and the LGBTQIA Alliance, I believe, are meeting today. And the LGBTQIA Alliance is actually meeting every Sunday in May for Pride planning. So we need lots of hands on deck to help us decorate our float and sign up for Pride Fest and things like that. So if you're interested, you can mark that on your connection card or email the church office or engage in the UUCBHAM Facebook group. There are a couple options to get connected there. And lastly, Wednesday, the 23rd at 6 p.m. In the library, the Spiritual Seekers Connection Circle will meet. Helping Hands will meet in the yellow classroom downstairs, and childcare will be available. And then lastly, next Sunday is our May Day Beltane celebration. It's right after service at 11:30. There will be the maypole, games for kids, and a lot more. There will be a silent auction just like last year. So if you have something that you'd like to donate to the silent auction, please reach out to Farrah Tatum or get connected in that Facebook group. This is a cups event, and all of the funds that we raise from the silent auction are going towards making our fire pit more accessible. And now we'll extinguish our chalice. Easter is not a time for groping through dusty, musty tombs to disapprove spontaneous generation or even to prove eternal life. It is a day to fan the ashes of dead hope, a day to banish doubt, and to seek the slopes where the sun is rising, to revel in the faith that transports us out of awareness and dead past into the vast and inviting unknown.